there is a way to use the language of protecting our peace that sounds wise, can almost sort of protect us from being challenged, but it's actually training us not to love difficult people. We only have to love people that are easy, that don't require patience. You see, some relationships do not blow up. They go quiet. Nobody yells, nobody makes a scene, but they just learn where not to step. There are subjects you do not bring up. There are people that you are careful around. Conversations you replay in your head, but you never actually have. And because nothing dramatic ever happens, it can feel like you're at peace. No yelling, just distance. And sometimes distance is wisdom in relationships. But sometimes what we call peace is actually just avoidance with a better set of manners with it. But you see, Jesus knows the difference between a relationship that has been healed, where there's real peace, and a relationship where everyone's just agreed not to touch the elephant in the room. And this is why the words here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9 are not as comfortable as it may first sound. Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." And in that statement, this morning, Jesus is not asking us whether we like peace. Almost everyone would answer yes. Sign me up. I like peace, right? He's not asking whether we like peace. He's asking whether we are willing to make it. And there's a distinction between those things. Peacemaker. The last part of that word is the key part. The word maker. Jesus is not here describing a personality type. Right? Some people dislike conflict because conflict makes life uncomfortable. But avoiding tension is not the same thing as making peace. Just because you don't scream and yell doesn't mean you're a peacemaker. Right? Romans chapter 14, verse 19, the Apostle Paul says, "Let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding." Here, Paul indicates that peace is something that we pursue. It's not something that just automatically happens because we have that personality type. And this pursuing of what makes for peace happens in two directions. First, peacemakers help people find peace with God. The gospel, the good news about Jesus' life and death and resurrection from the dead, that good news, that gospel is the deepest peacemaking word because people are separated from God because of their sin. And so God's creatures, His people, and the Creator need to be brought back together. And when we share the gospel, the good news of what Christ has done is the means of bringing peace between God and His people, His creatures. So there's a pursuing of making peace between people and God, but there's also a dynamic of pursuing peace between people, right? Peacemakers help others move towards reconciliation. So they maybe see two people that are at odds and they help bring them together. Or they themselves move toward people that they have wronged or people who have wronged them. But in both directions, whether that's making peace between people and God or between other people, peacemaking requires both truth and love. Truth matters because sin cannot be healed by pretending. And love matters because people are not problems that we have to defeat or gain victory over. In summary, a peacemaker, when Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers," what He's referring to are people who move toward what sin has broken with truth and with love. So when Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers," that is what He means. A peacemaker moves toward what sin has broken with truth and love. But by making that kind of statement, calling that blessing or happiness rest on those who make peace, what is it that Jesus is confronting in us that He needs to say that? Well, Jesus is confronting our demand for peace on our terms, right? Because when most people say, "Well, I'm for peace," what we really mean by that is we're for peace as long as that peace happens on the terms in which we're comfortable with. What do we mean by this? As I said, we don't usually reject peace. What we do is we rename something that's easier for us to do, and we slap peace on it when there's actually not peace involved. There are two ways that we sort of counterfeit peacemaking. Right? The first way is through peace faking. Peace faking. Peace faking avoids truth to keep comfort. Right? It's not going to acknowledge what's wrong because it's trying to keep everything sort of comfortable and everyone happy with everybody. It's peace faking. Right? Peace faking says, "I'm fine," when it's not fine. It sounds patient. It often looks mature. It's protecting comfort, though. It's not pursuing truth. It says, "I don't want this to become a big deal," when the real issue is, I don't want to deal with this problem with honesty because it's going to get uncomfortable. Peace faking says that I am safe if nothing has to be faced or dealt with in relationship, either with God or with other people. And on the other extreme of peace faking is probably what most of the time we associate when we think about peacemaking. We're talking about dealing with peace breaking. Right? And peace breaking sacrifices love in order to gain control. Right? So peace breaking will often come with this kind of phrase. "Well, Seth, I'm just telling the truth." Right? But the truth they're telling is used as a weapon to control or overpower someone that's doing or believing or saying something they don't agree with. The goal in peace breaking is never restoration of building a real relationship. The goal of a peace breaker is to win, to corner someone, to prove their point, to get folks to cry "uncle" and acknowledge that they're right. So peace breaking says, I am safe if I'm in control. Both of those things are offering us a false God. Peace faking wants it quiet without having to, because they don't want to tell the truth, so they'll sacrifice the truth to get that. And peace breaking wants victory and control without showing love to people that they disagree with or have conflict with. And the Bible tells us that Jesus blesses neither of those. The peace fakers are not blessed, and the peace breakers are not blessed. And for most of us, I think peace faking is the more respectable and therefore the more dangerous form of a false peace. And that's where the bulk of our sermon is going to focus. Peace faking sounds mature, it keeps things from getting ugly, but the reality is it doesn't make peace. And that's what we're actually after. Not staying comfortable, but making peace. Now, how does this show up, this peace faking, particularly, how does it show up in our culture? Right? Well, in our culture, we call cutting people off protecting our peace. This is a very, very common phrase that's tossed around. You hear this type of advice everywhere you look. Remove toxic people, guard your energy, you don't owe access to anyone. Right? Now, I want to be clear. Sometimes boundaries are wise and necessary. Right? Peacemaking does not require anyone to remain exposed to dangerous abuse. Okay? Let's get that caveat out there because it's an important one. But at the same time, there is a way to use the language of protecting our peace that sounds wise, can almost sort of protect us from being challenged, but it's actually training us not to love difficult people. We only have to love people that are easy, that don't require patience or people contradicting us. I don't know about you, but I don't like people contradicting me, right? Right? Someone says something that hits one of your convictions. Maybe it's a political conviction, a parenting approach that you've adopted, a form of entertainment. Maybe they've even criticized country music, right? Something that you care deeply about. And they don't just offer this comment, they say it with an edge, a cockiness. They sound dismissive of something that's very important to you. And you feel judged. And so you're done. Not because the relationship was unsafe, not because you sought further understanding, not because you tried to move towards them with truth and love. You're done because they contradicted you, made you feel judged, and so distance feels easier and more comfortable than patience and peacemaking. You see, you don't have to yell to refuse to show someone love and make peace. And maybe the person in sharing was really careless and they were very arrogant in how they made that statement. And again, sometimes wisdom requires a different boundary. But sometimes, and I think a lot of the times, when people are cutting people off, what they call protecting their peace is just protecting their right to never be contradicted and to never be uncomfortable. That is peace on my terms, not on God's terms. That's the way it shows itself in our culture. Now, in the church, we won't necessarily cut people off, though sometimes that might happen. What we tend to do is we call avoiding hard conversations keeping the peace. Now, this version is harder to see because everyone sort of stays together in the same room. No one is cut off. No one is causing a scene, right? You still smile. You still say, "Good to see you." You still sit in the same service and sing the same songs. But you've stopped moving toward that person that you used to move toward. You rehearse the conversation in your head, but you never have the conversation with the person. You explain the situation to someone else, but not to the person that's involved. You call it giving it time, but time isn't healing anything in that relationship. It's only making your avoidance of that person feel normal. But you see, Jesus gives us a different direction. In Matthew chapter 18, verse 15, He says, "If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone." Now, sometimes situations require protection and help from others before you go by yourself. I acknowledge that. But the ordinary, most common direction that Jesus gives us when there has been a breaking of peace between me and another person is very simple, one word: go. When we do not go, when we think we're wiser, or we think we can just disregard what Jesus tells us to do, the conflict does not just magically disappear. What happens is it hardens our hearts. The relationship becomes more awkward. The story that you tell yourself in your head becomes more settled. The motives that you assign to the other person become darker. And eventually, another church down the road can start to look more attractive. Not because the church has a clear understanding of doctrine in your mind or their approach to making disciples is stronger, but it looks more attractive because the person that you're in conflict with will not be sitting across the room. Now, there are legitimate reasons to leave a church. But I can tell you that in almost every church except one, we only had 12 people in that church. Right? But in every church I've been a part of, when people say it's time for a change, there's always been an example where that really meant there's an offense that was never named with somebody, or a sin that needed to be confessed. Brothers and sisters, when we treat conflict way, that is not keeping the peace. That's not the behavior of a peacemaker. What that is burying the conflict and asking politeness and civility to guard the grave. But Jesus does not bless people who keep the room calm while the relationship stays broken. He blesses peacemakers, people who move toward what sin has broken with truth and love. Now, if we're going to be able to avoid this tendency, this demand for peace on our own terms, we need help outside of ourselves. We don't possess the resources inside ourselves. And this is where Jesus comes front and center. Because Jesus made peace by moving toward His enemies and reconciling us to God through His death on the cross. You see, peace-faking says, I am safe, I'm comfortable if nothing has to be faced. Hard conversations don't have to be had. Difficult people can just be cut out. But the cross says something better. The cross tells us we are safe, eternally safe, because Jesus faced what we could not face. Romans chapter 5 says, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. That means that our deepest need for peace is not first an inner calm or a better conflict skills with other people. Our greatest and foremost need is that we are at peace with God. And that peace doesn't come through us. It comes as a gift we must receive from God. We don't make that peace. Romans chapter 5 verse 10 says that Christ died for us while we were enemies. Notice that. We were not misunderstood friends who needed a little repair. We were sinners who had turned from God, resisted His rule, and deserved His judgment. And God did not make peace by making sin seem a small thing. He didn't say, oh, it's fine, when it wasn't fine. He took action. He wasn't passive. He sent His Son, and His Son moved toward His enemies who would reject Him, who would accuse Him, who would nail Him to a cross. So Jesus faced the truth about our sin, and He bore the judgment that our sin deserved. And because of that, Paul says in Colossians 1, God made peace by the blood of His cross. That's the peace that Jesus made. Not peace by avoiding the problem, not peace by control, but peace by sacrifice, motivated from love. And so at the cross, truth about our sin and love for enemies meet. The truth says that our sin is so serious. It's serious enough that the Son of God had to die. And love says that God was willing to give His Son. He loved us so much that He was willing to give His Son that His enemies could become His children. So if you're here this morning, this is really the thing you need to take away. Not getting better at making peace with other people, but understanding where real peace begins. You're never going to have real peace with others until you first and foremost have peace with God. You won't find real peace by hiding from God. You won't find real peace by telling yourself everything is fine about you. Real peace starts and begins when you stop running from the truth and you come to Christ. Repent of your sin. Trust Christ's death on the cross and His resurrection from the dead as your means of having peace with your Creator. And then receive the peace that He has made by His death on the cross. Now, once we have received that peace with God from His Son Jesus Christ, that peace begins to shape how we pursue peace with other people. Okay? Because Christ has made peace with God for us, we can take the next obedient step toward another person. So you think about peace with someone else, there's before our conversation, there's in our conversation, and then there's after the conversation. Before the conversation, if we're going to practice the peace that Christ has made, we have to look inward. In the book of James, James says that quarrels, conflict, come from passions, desires that are within us. You can read about that in James chapter 4. And so conflict is not only revealing what the other person did to us, it's revealing what we wanted badly enough to become angry or controlling or withdrawn or unwilling to forgive the person that has sinned against us. So before rehearsing their failures, we will address them, but before we get there, we need to step back and look inside ourselves and ask, what am I demanding? What am I afraid of losing? What do I need to confess to make peace in this relationship? Now, looking inward doesn't mean pretending the other person has done nothing wrong. I'm not saying that. But it means refusing to enter the conversation convinced that obedience belongs only to the other person. Conflict, like tango, often requires two, at least two. So after we look inward, then we move toward the person. As we quoted earlier from Matthew 18, verse 15, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Go to the person. Not first to the people who are most likely to agree with you. Again, sometimes you will need counsel or maybe someone mature to help you navigate that. Seek help that moves the conversation toward the person and not around them or about them. Ask someone to help you pursue what is true and peaceful, not merely to confirm your version of the story. Oftentimes when I've been involved in these types of situations, you end up becoming, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but you become almost the whipping boy for both people that are upset. You know, because they start thinking, well, you're taking this side or you're taking that side. And oftentimes I'll just say, you know what, I am taking a side, but it's not your side or their side. I'm taking God's side. And if we would all do that, we could actually make peace. It's an important thing to keep in mind. And then, once you've moved towards the person, you own what is yours. Not, I'm sorry if you were hurt. Not, mistakes were made. But sit down and say, maybe I've been avoiding you because I was hurt by what happened. But before I tell you what hurt me, I need to own what I've done. I've talked about you to someone else instead of coming to you. That's gossip. I've allowed resentment towards you to grow and fester in my heart. That was wrong. And I'm asking you to forgive me. Now, you've not surrendered the truth of what they did by doing that. You've simply stopped making their confession a condition for your obedience of what you need to do to make peace. The person who has peace with God can confess honestly what they've done wrong because they have nothing to hide. They're at peace with their Creator, their God. And that peace allows them to pursue peace with other people. And then, after owning what is ours, we speak the truth in love. Remember, peace faking hides the truth. Peace breaking uses the truth to punish people. But peacemaking speaks the truth for the good of the other person and with the goal of restoring the relationship with them. You see, we can say something hard without trying to corner someone, to humiliate them, or sort of defeat them. But we have to keep that balance of truth and love. Truth is not less true because it was spoken with gentleness. And gentleness is not loving when it refuses to tell the truth. And then after the conversation, we have to remember the truth to pursue peace as far as it depends on you. Romans chapter 12, verse 18 says, "If possible, so far as depends on you, live peaceably with all." If possible means reconciliation, peace, is not always reached. So far as depends on you means you are responsible, but you are not sovereign, right? You can't control what the other person does, whether they'll listen to you, whether they'll confess, whether they'll forgive you, whether they'll actually change. You're not in control of that. I'm not in control of that. So peacemaking is not some technique that if we just do it exactly right, it will produce the response that we want to happen. Sometimes you're going to pursue peace and it doesn't happen. We can't make peace by ourselves. But we can refuse to be the reason that peace was never pursued in that relationship. As much as depends on us, live peaceably with all. Now, why is this important? Well, with each of these Beatitudes, Jesus not only names a practice, but He gives and assigns a promise to it. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. You see, peacemakers are called sons of God because they resemble their Father. They resemble their Father. Notice here, Jesus does not say peacemakers become sons of God. He says they will be called sons of God. So peacemaking, being committed to making peace, does not earn your place in the family of God. You make peace not in order to earn God's favor or earn peace with God. You make peace because you have. You possess it already. It's one of the ways you know you have peace with God. It overflows in your relationships with other people. Now, peacemaking doesn't earn our place in the family, but bearing a family resemblance, God is the God of peace, bearing His resemblance, can I just be frank with you, it's very costly. That's why we don't do it. You see, peacemaking can cost us the comfort of staying quiet, or can cost us the satisfaction of staying in control of a relationship. It might require us to move toward another person without knowing whether the conversation will produce the peace that you want. Is it going to actually produce the peace? And then we start weighing out, well, if it's not going to do that, then actually should I do it? And we start putting a formula together. When that was never the condition. Make peace if everybody else is willing to do it. That's not what Jesus said. You see, sometimes it costs you even when you do what is right. It's very hard for me, right? You can move toward peace, and the other person may pull farther away. You may confess what is yours, and they may refuse to own what is theirs. You may speak the truth in love and with gentleness and with kindness and still be labeled harsh and unloving or even abusive. But the final word over our obedience does not belong to the other person. Blessed are the peacemakers. As so far as it depends on you, blessed are the peacemakers. Why? For they shall be called sons of God. Jesus points to the day when the Father will openly vindicate His children. Do you know that God knows whether you sought peace? And He will judge rightly what others judge falsely. Everyone plays the game of trying to, make everybody else think their narrative, their story, what happened. But at the end of the day, God's going to open it wide open. He's going to make it crystal clear. Who are His sons? Those who bear His resemblance in making and pursuing peace. And who are those that did not? You see, the Father will not mistake our faithfulness to pursue peace as failure. You see, everyone wants peace. From the Dalai Lama to the Beatles, right? Everybody wants peace. But few are committed to making it. So the question this morning is not whether peace matters. We're in agreement it does. The question is, where is God calling you to make peace? Who are you hoping not to run into in the lobby after the church service is over? What conversation are you avoiding with your spouse? Who have you talked about because you've not been willing to talk to? Brothers and sisters, do not dodge this. Name the person. Name the conversation. Maybe the first step for you is to get alone before God and say, Lord, I've wanted comfort more than I've wanted peace. Forgive me. For some of you, that next step is a phone call. It's saying, can we talk? I've sinned against you. For others, it's asking someone mature to help. Not to take your side, but to help you both obey Christ. But do not leave here this morning renaming avoidance and calling it peace. Do not hide disobedience to pursue peace under Iowa nice. Do not wait for someone else to make obedience easy. Christ has made peace with you with God. So the safety that you've been looking for in distance or silence or control has already been given to you in Christ. And because Christ has faced what you could not face, you can face what obedience requires when it comes to making peace. So take that next step toward peace. Not as someone who's trying to earn or keep his place in the family, but as a child learning to resemble your Father in heaven. Because after all, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Let's pray.